Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, well, we're tackling something huge, maybe the most complex, contradictory, and consequential 15 years in modern history,
Yeah.
the French Revolution.
It really is. It's a story that's just full of these sublime ideals crashing headfirst into, well, visceral, terrifying reality.
Viscerals is the word. And it's not just a historical event, is it? It feels more like
Right.
a crucible.
Absolutely, a crucible. The sources we've got lined up today, they really track this incredible journey. France starts as an absolute monarchy, drowning in debt, basically.
Right.
Then it explodes into this fiery, idealistic republic, promising liberty for everyone.
Universal liberty, yeah.
But then it descends into this nightmare, mass executions, the terror.
And somehow, out of all that, you end up with an emperor, Napoleon.
Exactly, crowning himself. It's just staggering.
That speed of change, that sheer velocity, that's our deep dive mission today.
Yeah.
We want to unpack how France went from the fall of the Bastille in '89 to Napoleon's coronation in 1804.
And the core challenge, the intellectual puzzle, is that contradiction, isn't it?
It has to be. How did liberty, equality, fraternity, this sacred motto, somehow end up justifying the guillotine?
Well, not just justifying it, but, paving the way for a brand new, incredibly powerful dictatorship. It's a stunning paradox.
It really is.
And I think to even start understanding it, you have to realize the revolution wasn't just one thing. It wasn't monolithic.
Right. Layers upon layers.
Exactly. It was a whole series of overlapping revolutions, often competing with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Social, economic, political, ideological, all happening at once. #tag Gaia. Introduction. The contradiction.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this. Where do we even begin? I think the sources suggest we start not in those, gilded salons with the philosophers,
Definitely
but
not.
down in the mud,
Uh-huh.
in the streets, the provinces. We have to start with the raw suffering, don't we? Physical suffering.
Yes, because that suffering, that desperation, it's what gave all the revolutionary talk it's fuel, it's urgency.
It had to come from somewhere real.
Absolutely. The immediate triggers, they were fundamentally economic and agricultural. The late 1780s, you had one failed harvest after another.
Disaster for ordinary people.
Complete disaster. The price of bread. I mean, this was the staple food, right? Sometimes it ate up, 80% of a worker's income?
80%, just for bread.
It skyrocketed. We've got these accounts. People boiling weeds.
Right.
Just boiling weeds to try and make some kind of soup. The suffering was immediate. It was everywhere. And politically, it was just becoming unbearable.
But as you said, it's more complex. The sources argue that the real engine, the deeper drive, wasn't just empty bellies. That was the accelerant, maybe.
Yes, exactly. The accelerant.
The deeper thing was this hunger for dignity, for justice, for the kind of systemic change that, frankly, only the Enlightenment had made people even imagine was possible.
Precisely. People were just tired of the grotesque inequality. And that brings us right to the pre-1789 setup, the Kingdom of Contradictions.
Right. Describe that France.
Well, on paper, France was wealthy, a major power, but the system, the state itself, was bankrupt. Generations of expensive wars.
Including bankrolling the American Revolution, ironically.
Exactly. Huge amounts of money poured into supporting America against a monarchy. And who had to pay back that debt?
Not the people with the actual wealth, that's for sure.
No way. The old regime, the ancient regime, it was all about this rigid class structure, privilege based on birth, not merit. You had the first estate, the clergy, and the second estate, the nobility. Together, they were, less than 3% of the population?
Tiny fraction.
But they owned most of the land. And crucially, they were often exempt from the really heavy taxes.
So you've got Versailles just dazzling everyone with silk and gold, this tiny minority paying almost nothing.
Well, the third estate, and that's everyone else, from the poorest peasant farmer right up to the richest city merchant.
Right, the vast majority.
They're getting crushed by taxes. The taille, the land tax, the hated gabelle, the salt tax, the tithes they had to pay to the church.
It's just completely unsustainable. The whole financial weight is on the people least able to carry it.
It created this immense pressure cooker, but the intellectual pressure, that came from somewhere else. And this is where theory meets practice in such an explosive way.
The Enlightenment thinkers.
Yes. Rousseau, Montesquieu, Voltaire. Their ideas about the social contract, separation of powers, freedom of speech, these weren't just stuck in philosophical texts anymore.
They'd escaped the academy.
Completely. They were in pamphlets, coffee houses, discussions. And as you said, the American Revolution was like proof of concept.
French soldiers came home having seen Republican ideals in action.
And the very act of funding America against King George had spread these concepts, natural rights, popular sovereignty, all through French society, even among people who couldn't read the philosophers themselves.
So by the late 1780s, it's like people finally had a language, a powerful common language, to describe the injustice they felt.
Exactly. They didn't just feel poor or feel oppressed. They knew they were being treated unfairly according to these new rational principles. And they had a blueprint, however vague, for a society based on equitable law.
That combination. Practical suffering, moral outrage, and this ready-made philosophical toolkit.
That was the explosive mix. That's what detonated in 1789, #Tech Trade 2, the spark and the first wave of idealism, 1789.
Okay, so let's get to the flashpoint.
Yeah.
The king, Louis XVI, he's forced to do something because the financial crisis is existential now. The state is collapsing.
It really is.
And Louis, the sources paint him as, well, almost a tragic figure in some ways. Not a malicious tyrant like some, but deeply indecisive, insulated, just completely overwhelmed.
I think overwhelmed is right. He was a captive of tradition, really, unable to grasp the scale of the change needed. And, fueling the public anger was his wife, Marie Antoinette.
The Austrian.
The Austrian, yeah. She became this potent symbol of foreign influence, royal extravagance, complete disconnect from the people suffering. The famous "let them eat cake" line.
Probably never said it right, but it stuck.
Exactly. Whether she said it or not doesn't almost matter. It perfectly captured the public perception of royal indifference. The monarchy seemed to be just bleeding France dry.
So desperate for cash, the king makes this fateful decision in 1789. He calls the Estates General,
which hadn't met since 1614. Think about that. This ancient body representing the three social orders is suddenly called back to life.
supposedly to fix the finances. But it becomes the stage for revolution instead.
Because the structure itself was the first big fight. The first and second estates, the clergy and nobles, they knew the score. They insisted on voting by estate, not by head.
Meaning the two privileged orders could always outvote the third estate, 2-1, even though the third estate represented, 97% of France?
Exactly. It was fundamentally unfair. And this is where the representatives of the third estate, who were mostly educated guys, lawyers, businessmen, show their political savvy.
They don't just ask for a better deal.
No. They demand a whole new game. They basically say, we represent the nation. They break away. They declare themselves the National Assembly.
This is it. The moment sovereignty shifts, at least theoretically, from the king
to the people represented by this assembly. And when the king tries to shut them down, literally locks them out of their meeting hall.
They just move next door.
To an indoor tennis court. And that's the tennis court oath. June 1789. They swear they won't disband until France has a written constitution. It's basically a peaceful political coup asserting popular will over royal decree.
But it's still mostly political theater at this point. In Versailles, how does it jump to the streets of Paris and turn violent? The king hesitates, right?
He does. He waffles. Should he use force? Shouldn't he? And that hesitation is crucial. It gives space for things to escalate in Paris. People see troops massing around the city.
Foreign regiments, often Swiss or German, which made people even more suspicious.
Right. They interpret it, probably correctly, as the king preparing a crackdown. But the real trigger, the thing that sparks the explosion, is the dismissal of Jacques Necker.
The finance minister. Why was he so important?
He was popular, seen as sympathetic to the Third Estate, maybe their only ally high up in the government. Firing him looked like the signal. The king's done negotiating, force is coming.
And the reaction is immediate. July 14th. People need weapons to defend themselves.
They storm the Invalides, the military hospital, seize muskets, and then they turn their attention to the ultimate symbol.
The Bastille.
Yeah. And the sources are clear. It wasn't really about freeing prisoners. There were only 7 guys in there.
Huh, really? Only 7?
Yeah, a couple of counterfeiters, some guys deemed insane. It was about the gunpowder stored inside. And more than that, it was this huge, looming medieval fortress right in the heart of Paris, a symbol of royal tyranny, arbitrary arrests, the lettre de cachet.
So taking it down was like tearing down the symbol of that oppression.
Exactly. Its fall was this huge psychological blow to royal authority. It showed the king's power wasn't absolute. It could be defeated by the people.
And this is stark in the sources. The violence starts almost immediately. The governor of the Bastille, Delaunay, he surrenders.
And he's killed anyway. Him and the mayor of Paris, Flesselles, their heads are cut off, stuck on pikes, and paraded through the streets.
Right there. At the very beginning, liberty and brutal violence side by side.
It's a really unsettling precedent. Even revolutionaries at the time noted how disturbing it was. It showed this raw, popular energy that the politicians in the assembly couldn't necessarily control. Justice, or maybe vengeance, was being delivered instantly, violently on the streets.
And that energy, that fear, doesn't stay in Paris. It spreads like wildfire into the countryside. The Great Fear.
Yeah, the Grand Peur, summer of 1789. It's this wave of rural panic. Rumors are flying nobles are hiring bandits, brigands to burn crops, steal food, crush the peasants.
So the peasants react.
They react defensively but violently. They rise up across France. They attack manor houses, chateaux. But they're not just looting. They're specifically targeting the records.
The feudal records.
Exactly. The terriers. These were the legal documents that listed all the feudal dues, the rents, the labor obligations owed to the lord. They hunted them down and burned them.
Literally burning the contracts of their own oppression. Wow.
It's incredibly symbolic and effective. They're wiping the slate clean. Noble families, terrified, start fleeing the country. They become the émigrés. The old order isn't just trembling now. It's physically collapsing in the countryside.
And all this chaos, this mass uprising, it feeds back into the politics in Versailles, right? It pushes the National Assembly to act even faster.
Definitely. They see the country is on the verge of disintegration. They have to do something radical to restore order, but on new terms. And they act with stunning speed. Legislative velocity, you called it.
Which brings us to that incredible night, August 4th, 1789.
Yeah, the night the old regime essentially committed suicide. It was this all-night session, apparently fueled by a mix of genuine patriotic fervor, fear, and maybe some political calculation.
Nobles and clergy get up one after another.
And renounce their privileges. Feudal dues, gone. Serfdom, gone. Special hunting rights, gone. The church tithe, gone. Tax exemptions, gone. Inherited legal status, gone. They basically dismantled the entire legal and social structure of feudal France in a single night.
Unbelievable. Wiping clean 1,000 years of history.
It was astonishing, a revolutionary act carried out by the privileged themselves under immense pressure.
And then, building on that cleared ground, a few weeks later, they produced the cornerstone document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen.
If the tennis court oath was the political birth certificate, the Declaration is the philosophical soul of the revolution. And its impact is enormous, still felt today in human rights law.
What are the core ideas?
Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. That's Article 1. Just explosive. It asserts fundamental rights: liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Sovereignty resides in the nation, not the king. Law must express the general will.
Foundational stuff. But the sources are quick to point out even this masterpiece had its, well, blind spots, its limitations.
Oh, absolutely. It proclaimed universal rights, but in practice, it mainly enshrined political rights for men, specifically men with property.
So not women.
Definitely not women. Olympe de Gouges famously wrote her Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen in response, pointing out the hypocrisy. She paid for it later with her life.
And initially it excluded poorer men too, right? And obviously enslaved people in the colonies.
Yes. The application was selective, despite the universal language, which highlights this constant tension in the revolution.
Between the beautiful ideals written down
and the messy, often brutal reality on the ground. Which brings us back to bread.
October 1789. Because you can write the most elegant declaration ever, but as you said earlier, ideals don't feed families.
Exactly. The practical revolution, the revolution driven by hunger, reasserts itself. This is the Women's March on Versailles.
Thousands of women, mostly market women from Paris, the Poissards.
Tough working-class women. They march 12 miles in the rain, and they're not primarily demanding votes or abstract rights. They're demanding bread. They're demanding the king do something about the food shortages and the prices.
And they are furious. They storm the palace grounds, confront the assembly. Some even break into the queen's chambers.
It gets very dangerous. They kill some guards. They eventually force the king, the queen, and the young dauphin to come back with them to Paris.
And that image is just incredible. The royal family, essentially captives, being escorted back to the city by this armed crowd of women.
And the crowd is chanting, "We've brought back the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy."
Wow. Reducing the king to the baker.
It's a phenomenal distillation of the power shift. They see him not as divinely appointed, but as the person responsible for their subsistence. And by bringing him to Paris, lodging him in the Tuileries Palace, the monarchy is now officially a prisoner of the revolution, watched constantly by the people of Paris. The move towards a republic feels almost inevitable after this. ###3, the path to radicalism and blood, 1791, 1793.
Okay, so by 1791, France is technically a constitutional monarchy. They have a king, but also a powerful National Assembly writing laws.
Yeah.
The project seems maybe on track.
You'd think so. They've got a constitution, the old privileges are gone, but the next couple of years, 1791 to 93, see trust just completely shatter. And that breakdown pushes France onto a much more radical path, towards republicanism, war, and ultimately, the terror.
What's the main event that breaks that trust?
Without a doubt, it's the King's Flight, the flight to Varennes, June 1791.
He tries to escape.
He and the Queen, Marie Antoinette, and their children. They sneak out of Paris in disguise, heading for the eastern border, hoping to reach royalist troops and maybe get support from Austria, the Queen's homeland.
But they get caught.
Yeah, famously recognized near the town of Varennes by a postmaster who supposedly identified the king from his image on a coin. They're arrested and escorted back to Paris.
And the mood this time, not like the Women's March.
Totally different.
Yeah.
The sources describe the return journey as being through vast, silent crowds. Just sullen, disillusioned people watching their king brought back like a fugitive.
This feels like the point of no return for the monarchy.
Absolutely. Before Varennes, you could maybe argue Louis was a well-meaning guy, misled by bad advisors or the queen. After Varennes, it looked like clear proof he was actively rejecting the constitution he'd sworn to uphold, that he was plotting with foreign powers against his own nation.
Treason, basically.
That's how many saw it. It destroyed the possibility of a trusting partnership between the king and the nation. It massively amplified the voices calling for getting rid of the monarchy altogether, for a full republic.
And the political landscape itself is heating up, becoming more organized, more intense.
Yes. The action starts moving away from the big open assembly debates and into the political clubs. These become the real engines of revolutionary ideology and action.
And the most famous, the most dominant, has to be the Jacobin Club.
The Jacobins are crucial. Initially, it was a more moderate club, but it becomes increasingly radicalized. And this is where we really need to talk about Maximilien Robespierre.
Okay, Robespierre. His name is almost synonymous with the most radical phase, the Terror. What drove him?
He's a fascinating and frankly terrifying figure, a lawyer from Arras, highly intelligent, meticulous, austere, kind of priggish, maybe, but utterly consumed by the revolution, specifically by the ideas of Rousseau about the general will and civic virtue.
Virtue. That word keeps coming up with him.
It's central. The sources stress his singular focus on virtue. For Robespierre, the revolution wasn't just about changing laws or institutions. It was about creating a morally perfect society, a republic of virtue. Pure, incorruptible citizens devoted to the common good.
And that sounds noble, but
it leads him down a very dark path. He comes to believe that achieving this perfect republic justifies almost any means, including terror, to purge the impure and the counter-revolutionary.
So the political debates are shifting.
Yeah.
It's not just about the king anymore. It's factions within the revolution fighting each other.
Exactly. You've got the Jacobins becoming more radical. You have the Girondins, who are also Republicans, but maybe seen as more moderate, representing the provinces more.
Yeah.
And you still have some constitutional monarchists, the Feuillants, trying to hold the line. And a key split happens over the question of war.
War? Against who?
Against the other European monarchies, particularly Austria and Prussia. They're alarmed by the revolution, sheltering the émigrés and making threatening noises.
And some revolutionaries wanted war.
Yes. Ironically, it was the more moderate Girondins who pushed hard for war in early 1792. They thought it would do two things. One, unite the country against a common enemy. And two, expose the king's suspected treachery if he didn't support the war effort enthusiastically, maybe even spread the revolution abroad.
And Robespierre.
Robespierre famously argued against the war, at least initially. He warned, very presciently, that war would empower the military, lead to dictatorship, and be used as an excuse to repress dissent at home. No one loves armed missionaries, he said.
But he lost that argument.
He did. France declares war on Austria in April 1792. Prussia joins Austria soon after. Now, the revolution isn't just an internal struggle. It has to defend itself against major European powers.
And that external threat must have ramped up the internal paranoia massively.
Instantly. The war goes badly at first for France. The Prussian army advances. The Duke of Brunswick, commanding the Allied forces, issues this manifesto threatening to basically level Paris if the royal family is harmed.
Which probably had the opposite effect.
Right. Totally counterproductive. It enraged the Parisian populace, the sans-culottes. It seemed to confirm the link between the king and the foreign enemy. In August 1792, they've had enough. They storm the Tuileries Palace where the king is living.
A bloody battle ensues.
Very bloody. The Swiss Guard defending the king are massacred. The royal family barely escapes with their lives, taking refuge with the Legislative Assembly. But it's over for the monarchy. The assembly formally suspends the king and votes to imprison him. A new, more radical assembly, the National Convention is called, elected by universal male suffrage this time.
But even before the king is tried, there's this explosion of violence. The September massacres, September 1792.
This is a truly horrifying moment. Fear is absolutely rampant in Paris. The Prussian army is getting closer. There's panic that the prisoners locked up in the city, priests, nobles, political suspects, but also common criminals, will break out and attack the city from within while the volunteer soldiers are leaving for the front.
So mobs take matters into their own hands.
Yes. Spurred on by radical journalists like Marat, mobs storm the prisons, and over several days they drag out the inmates and butcher them.
How many?
Estimates vary, but probably over 1,000 people. Maybe 1,200 or 1,400. Priests who refuse to swear allegiance to the new state, aristocrats, suspected royalists, but also many ordinary prisoners caught up in the frenzy. It's summary execution on a mass scale. No trials, just drumhead tribunals in the prisons and then murder. It's decentralized, popular terror driven by fear and vengeance. The sources mark this as the definitive moment where any remaining illusions about a peaceful, orderly revolution are shattered. Justice blurs completely into vengeance.
So the new National Convention meets, declares France a republic on September 21st, 1792. Year one of the republic begins, but they have this massive problem. What to do with the imprisoned king, now just citizen Louis Capet?
It's the central question. Can a republic coexist with a living former king? For the radicals, especially Robespierre and the Jacobins, the answer is emphatically no.
His very existence is a threat.
They argued his life was incompatible with the republic's survival. He was put on trial for treason before the convention itself. The outcome was pretty much predetermined.
Found guilty.
Found guilty. The vote on his execution was closer, but it passed. And in January 1793, Louis XVI was taken to the Place de la Révolution, now Place de la Concorde, and executed by guillotine.
The symbolism's just immense. They didn't just depose the king, they killed him. Publicly.
Yes, it was a definitive act. As some put it, the Republic was sealed in blood. There was no going back now. You kill a king, you sever all ties with the past, you commit fully to the revolution, whatever the cost. And the cost was about to get much, much higher.
So regicide. War against most of Europe, and now massive internal revolts breaking out, especially the Vendée region in the west, a bloody counter-revolution.
Plus, the economy is still collapsing, food shortages are rampant, assignats, the revolutionary paper money, are becoming worthless. France is facing existential threats from every direction: foreign invasion, civil war, economic meltdown.
Total crisis. And into this vacuum steps the Committee of Public Safety.
Established by the convention in April 1793, initially intended as an emergency war cabinet, basically. But it quickly accumulates vast executive powers, essentially becoming the government. And Robespierre becomes its leading voice, its driving force.
And this is the body that initiates and oversees the Reign of Terror.
Yes. For Robespierre and his faction, the Jacobins now dominant in the convention, the situation demanded extreme measures. If the Republic of Virtue was to survive against all these enemies, internal and external, then any dissent, any opposition, any lack of revolutionary zeal had to be ruthlessly crushed.
This is where his ideology of virtue and terror comes in.
Exactly. The sources quote him arguing that virtue on its own is powerless without terror, but terror without virtue to guide it is disastrous, just blind violence. So they needed terror as an instrument to enforce revolutionary virtue, to protect the Republic until the crisis passed.
A terrifyingly logical justification for state-sponsored violence.
It's an ideology of purification through fear. And the chosen instrument of that purification becomes the guillotine.
Guillotine Nation, as you called it. It becomes this national symbol.
Gruesomely so. Dr. Guillotin hadn't invented it, but he advocated for it as a more humane, egalitarian method of execution than the horrible methods of the old regime. But under the terror, it becomes something else. Set up permanently in the Place de la Révolution, it turns execution into this daily public spectacle. Swift, efficient, visible, terrifying, designed to intimidate, to enforce obedience through fear.
And the legal tool to feed this machine was the Law of Suspects, September 1793.
That law is the cornerstone of the terror's legal framework, if you can call it that. It defines suspects incredibly broadly. Anyone who, by their actions, their connections, their words, even their writings, showed themselves to be supporters of tyranny or federalism or enemies of liberty.
So incredibly vague. Who could fall into that?
Almost anyone. Former nobles, relatives of émigrés, officials who'd been dismissed, anyone critical of the committee, anyone hoarding grain, anyone deemed insufficiently enthusiastic. The net was cast incredibly wide. And crucially, the revolutionary tribunals set up to try these suspects. They operated with minimal due process.
Suspicion basically equaled guilt.
Pretty much. Especially after later laws like the infamous Law of 22 Prairial in June 1794, which Robespierre pushed through. It stripped defendants of the right to a lawyer, made evidence almost optional, and basically limited the tribunal's verdict to either acquittal or death. It was designed purely to speed up the executions.
Just accelerate the machine.
The committee's goal was clear. Eliminate internal enemies swiftly and visibly to secure the state, mobilize the war effort, and impose unity through fear. The numbers are debated, but in Paris alone, thousands were guillotined. Across France, estimates run to at least 17,000 official executions, but tens, maybe hundreds of thousands more died in summary killings, mass drownings like those in Nantes, or in disease-ridden prisons.
And the sources really stress how indiscriminate it became. It wasn't just aristocrats and priests anymore.
No, not at all. Marie Antoinette was guillotined in October 1793, a powerful symbolic moment. The sources describe her being taken to the scaffold in a common cart, her hair shorn, a widow in rags stripping her of royal dignity before death.
But then the revolution starts eating its own children.
Absolutely. First, the committee turns on factions they deem too radical or too corrupt, like Hébert and his followers. Then, crucially, they turn on the more moderate faction within the convention, the Girondins. Key leaders like Rousseau are arrested and executed.
The message being?
Moderation is suspect. Disagreement is treason. You are either fully with the committee, fully committed to Robespierre's vision of virtue, or you are an enemy.
And then comes the moment that really shocks people, even supporters of the revolution. The execution of Georges Danton.
Danton, he was a giant of the early revolution. Charismatic, booming voice, minister of justice, a key figure in overthrowing the monarchy. He was on the first committee of public safety himself.
So why him?
By early 1794, Danton and his allies, the Indulgents, were arguing that the terror had gone too far. The Republic was winning the war now. The internal revolts were being crushed. It was time, Danton argued, to relax the terror, show clemency, move towards peace.
And Robespierre saw that as weakness, counter-revolution.
Exactly. For Robespierre, the pursuit of virtue was absolute and unending. Any call for leniency was dangerous backsliding, potentially motivated by corruption. Danton was notoriously less austere than Robespierre. Danton was arrested, put before the Revolutionary Tribunal.
Did he get to defend himself?
He tried. He had this powerful voice. He started swaying the crowd. Robespierre panicked and got the convention to pass a decree silencing defendants who insulted justice. Danton was silenced, condemned, and guillotined in April 1794.
His famous last words.
Supposedly to the executioner, "Show my head to the people, it is well worth seeing." He understood his own symbolic importance even in death. His execution showed no one was safe. If Danton could fall, anyone could.
The sources paint this picture of Paris during the height of the terror. A city of whispers.
That's a very apt description. It was an atmosphere of pervasive fear and suspicion. Neighbors denounced neighbors. A careless word could lead to the tribunal. Silence became the safest option. The promise of liberty had twisted into this reality where fear was the ultimate punishment and silence the only reward.
This incredible paradox. The pursuit of a republic of virtue created a machine of death.
It's the tragic core of the terror. Robespierre genuinely seemed to believe he was purifying the nation, creating this utopian society. But the method was mass murder, fueled by paranoia.
But eventually the fear turns back on the man orchestrating it. Robespierre pushes too far.
He does. By the summer of 1794, the Great Terror is at its peak. Executions accelerating thanks to that Law of 22 Prairial. But the external threats are receding. France is winning the war. People within the convention, even former allies of Robespierre, start thinking, why does this need to continue, and am I next?
He becomes isolated.
Very isolated. He gives this speech in the convention in late July 1794, 8 Thermidor, in the revolutionary calendar, where he talks vaguely about a new conspiracy, new traitors that need purging, but crucially, he refuses to name them.
Big mistake.
Fatal mistake. Everyone in the room felt threatened. They realized if they didn't act against him, he would pick them off one by one. The next day, 9 Thermidor, when Robespierre tries to speak, they shout him down. Down with the tyrant.
The convention turns on him.
They declare him and his close allies like the ruthless Saint-Just and the wheelchair-bound Couthon outlaws. There's a brief, chaotic attempt by his supporters in the Paris Commune to rescue him, but it fails. He's arrested, possibly after a failed suicide attempt that shattered his jaw.
And
Then, in the ultimate revolutionary irony, he's taken to the guillotine without trial. Just identified and executed along with his key followers on July 28, 1794, 10 Thermidor.
So the terror ends with more terror. Not with reform, but by eliminating the terrorists themselves.
Exactly. The system didn't change overnight, but the engine driving the intense phase of the terror was gone. Paris breathed a collective sigh of relief. The revolutionary government had effectively purged itself using its own instrument.
France survives. The Republic survives, but the dream of 1789 seems utterly shattered. Stained by blood, cynicism running deep. What comes next out of that exhaustion? #V. The Directory and the Calculated Rise of Napoleon, 1795 to 1799.
Yeah, exhaustion is the key word after Thermidor. People were tired of the bloodshed, tired of the constant political tension, tired of the demands for virtue and sacrifice. There's this profound desire for, well, maybe just normalcy, stability, definitely.
A government that doesn't chop your head off, but also isn't the corrupt old monarchy.
Exactly. So the Thermidorian Convention, the body that overthrew Robespierre, drafts a new constitution, the Constitution of Year 3, and this establishes the Directory in 1795.
The Directory lasts for 4 years, but its reputation is not great. Why? What was it designed to do, and why did it fail so badly?
It was designed, above all, to prevent another dictatorship like Robespierre's. So they deliberately made the executive branch weak and fragmented. Instead of one leader, they had 5 directors, chosen by the legislature. They also created a 2-house legislature, the Council of 500 and the Council of Ancients, hoping to slow down radical lawmaking. Plus, frequent elections were mandated. 1 director and 1/3 of the legislature had to be replaced each year.
Sounds like a recipe for instability, not stability.
Precisely. It guaranteed constant political maneuvering, infighting among the directors, and shifting alliances in the legislature. It was designed to be moderate and cautious, but it ended up being indecisive and often gridlocked.
And the sources paint a picture of rampant corruption during this period.
Yeah.
A big shift from Robespierre's icy virtue.
Oh, absolutely. If the terror was brutal, the Directory was cynical and corrupt. Bribery, influence peddling, shady government contracts, war profiteering. It was widespread. The directors themselves were often implicated.
Like the pendulum swung completely the other way.
It did. You see this explosion of conspicuous consumption, especially in Paris. The incroyables and merveilleux, these extravagantly dressed young people reacting against the austerity and grimness of the terror. Lots of partying, gambling, luxury.
While the economy for ordinary people was still terrible.
Still terrible. Inflation was high, bread was scarce. This created a huge disconnect between the political elite and the suffering population. People lost faith in the Directory's competence, its honesty, its legitimacy.
And politically, it was constantly lurching from crisis to crisis.
Constantly. It faced threats from both the left and the right. On the right, you had royalists dreaming of restoring the monarchy, sometimes winning elections. On the left, you had neo-Jacobins wanting to revive the radical phase, like Babeuf's conspiracy of equals.
So how did the directors stay in power?
Increasingly by relying on the army. They used troops to annul elections they didn't like the coup of Fructidor in 1797 against the royalists, or to suppress uprisings. They became utterly dependent on military force to maintain order at home.
And also dependent on the army to win wars abroad, right? To bring in money and distract people.
Yes, the wars continued, even expanded. Victories abroad were essential for the Directory's prestige and, frankly, its finances, through plunder and indemnities. This constant warfare and the reliance on the military, it created the perfect conditions for a strong military leader to step in.
Enter Napoleon Bonaparte.
Enter Napoleon.
Yeah.
Young, incredibly ambitious, strategically brilliant, a Corsican outsider who saw the power vacuum developing.
His first big splash is in Paris itself, isn't it? Even before Italy?
Yes, October 1795. 13 Vendémiaire in the revolutionary calendar. There's a big royalist uprising in Paris threatening the convention just before the Directory takes power. The politicians panic. They call on Barras, one of the incoming directors who knows Napoleon.
And Napoleon delivers.
Decisively. He brings up cannons and doesn't hesitate to fire grape-shot clusters of small pellets directly into the insurgent crowds near the Tuileries. It's brutal, bloody, but incredibly effective. The uprising collapses instantly.
The famous whiff of grape shot.
That's the phrase often used. It wasn't just a military action. It showed Napoleon's ruthlessness and his ability to restore order quickly when the politicians couldn't. It made him a hero to the Directory, at least for the moment. His reward: command of the Army of Italy.
And the Italian campaign of 1796-97? This is where he becomes a superstar.
An absolute legend. He takes this demoralized, poorly equipped army and transforms it. Through brilliant strategy, speed, and inspiring leadership, he wins victory after victory against the Austrians and their Italian allies. Lodi, Arcola, Rivoli. These become household names.
He's redrawing the map of Italy, setting up sister republics.
And sending back wagon loads of looted art and treasure to Paris, which the Directory desperately needs. But he's doing more than just winning battles. This is where we see him as the master of image.
How so?
He's a political general from the start. He writes his own dispatches back to Paris, exaggerating his victories, crafting his own legend. He even starts his own newspapers for the army and for distribution in France, promoting his image, building this intense personal loyalty among his soldiers and the public that bypasses the Directory completely.
He's creating his own power base, independent of the politicians.
Exactly. He's acting like a head of state in Italy, negotiating treaties, imposing his will. The directors in Paris, they're watching this with growing alarm. They fear his ambition, his popularity.
But they need him.
They desperately need his victories, his money, his prestige. It's a dangerous balancing act. They try to sideline him, maybe, keep him busy.
Which leads to the Egypt expedition in 1798.
That seems to be part of the calculation. Send him off on this grand, risky adventure far away. Cut off the Ottoman Empire's route to India, challenge British influence. Maybe he fails. Maybe he gets stuck there.
And the campaign itself, militarily.
It's mixed. He wins land battles, like the Battle of the Pyramids. Soldiers 40 centuries look down upon you. But the British Navy, under Nelson, finds and destroys the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile.
Stranding Napoleon's army.
Stranding the army. Logistically, it's a potential disaster. But Napoleon, again, controls the narrative. He emphasizes the glory, the adventure, the scientific discoveries made by the scholars he brought along.
The Rosetta Stone comes from this, right?
Exactly. He focuses on that, and then, sensing the political situation deteriorating back in France, he abandons his army and sails back secretly, arriving in October 1799, just as the Directory is facing yet another crisis. Military defeats in Europe, internal plotting, total loss of public confidence.
The timing is perfect.
Yeah.
Or perhaps perfectly calculated.
Probably a bit of both. He arrives back a hero, seemingly untainted by the Directory's failures or the bad news from Egypt, which hadn't fully caught up yet. The stage is set for the final act.
The coup of 18 Brumaire, November 9th, 1799.
Yeah. It's orchestrated by Napoleon along with some key political figures, like Sieyès, one of the directors himself, who thought they could use Napoleon as their sword and then control him.
Big miscalculation on their part.
Huge. The plan involves moving the legislative councils outside Paris, citing a fictional Jacobin plot, surrounding them with troops loyal to Napoleon, and forcing them to vote for a new constitution giving power to Napoleon and his allies.
Does it go smoothly?
Not entirely. Napoleon tries to address the Council of 500 himself, but he's not a great parliamentary speaker. He gets shouted down, jostled. He kind of loses his nerve.
Really, Napoleon?
Yeah. It's his brother, Lucien Bonaparte, who's president of the council, who saves the day. Lucien runs outside, tells the waiting soldiers that assassins tried to kill their general, and orders them to clear the hall.
And the soldiers obey.
They obey Napoleon, not the politicians. They march in with fixed bayonets, and the legislators literally jump out of the windows to escape. The Directory is dissolved by force.
And Napoleon declares the revolution is over.
He does. Citizens, the revolution is established on the principles with which it began. It is over. The fire is tamed. The blade is sheathed. By a military coup, #6, the end of the storm and the enduring legacy, 1799 to 1804. So, the coup succeeds. The Directory is gone. What replaces it is the consulate, established later in 1799.
The consulate. Sounds Roman, sounds stable. But who really holds the power?
Well, technically, there were 3 consuls. Napoleon made sure he was named first consul, and the new constitution, largely drafted by him, gave the first consul overwhelming executive and legislative power. The other 2 consuls, mostly advisory. The sources are clear. All effective power, political and military, was in Napoleon's hands from the start.
And the immediate impact, what do people feel?
Relief, mostly, and a sense of order returning. Napoleon wasn't interested in the Jacobins' endless pursuit of virtue, nor the Directory's chaotic corruption. His focus was pragmatic, to create a strong, efficient, centralized state, and he moved fast to implement stabilizing reforms.
What were the key ones?
He reorganized the whole administration, appointing prefects in each department, loyal directly to Paris, much more efficient than anything under the king or the revolutionary assemblies. He tackled the financial chaos, creating the Bank of France in 1800 to stabilize the currency and manage state debt.
Huge practical steps.
And he addressed one of the deepest wounds of the revolution, the conflict with the Catholic Church. By signing the Concordat of 1801 with the Pope, he basically made peace. Catholicism was recognized as the religion of the great majority of Frenchmen. The church gave up claims to lands confiscated during the Revolution, and clergy would be paid by the state. It brought religious peace back to France.
That must have been incredibly popular, especially in the countryside.
Hugely popular. It reconciled many Catholics to the new regime. But maybe his most lasting achievement, the thing that really cemented many of the revolution's gains into law, was the Napoleonic Code.
The Civil Code, yeah. Finalized in 1804. Why is it so important?
Because it took the chaotic mess of old feudal laws, royal decrees, and revolutionary legislation and replaced it with a single, unified, rational legal system for all of France. It was clear, logical, and relatively easy to understand.
What principles did it embody? What revolutionary ideas did it lock in?
Crucially, equality before the law for all male citizens. That was massive. The abolition of feudal privileges based on birthright confirmed, religious freedom protected, and, very importantly for the bourgeoisie who had backed the revolution, the absolute protection of private property rights. These were core demands from 1789, now set in stone.
So it preserved key liberal gains, but the sources also point out it wasn't purely progressive, right? It rolled back some things.
Oh, definitely. While it codified legal equality, the code was socially quite conservative, reflecting Napoleon's own views, perhaps. It strongly reaffirmed the authority of the husband and father within the family. Women's rights, which had seen some tentative advances during the Revolution, were significantly curtailed. Wives owed obedience to their husbands. Divorce was made much harder.
And what about slavery? The revolution that abolished it.
Napoleon reinstated slavery in the French colonies in 1802, particularly in the Caribbean, where sugar plantations were economically vital. A brutal betrayal of the universalist ideals proclaimed in 1789, driven by economic interests. So the code was a compromise. It secured the legal and property gains for the middle class, but clamped down on social radicalism and reinforced patriarchal authority.
A very Napoleonic solution. Pragmatic, centralizing, securing the gains that matter to the powerful, while jettisoning the more radical democratic elements.
Precisely. And this whole process of stabilization, consolidation, fueled by continued military victories abroad, restoring national pride, it all leads to the final, unbelievable yet perhaps predictable conclusion.
The ultimate irony.
The ultimate irony. This revolution that began with cries against absolute monarchy, that executed a king, that proclaimed the sovereignty of the people, it ends with Napoleon crowning himself Emperor of the French in 1804.
In Notre Dame Cathedral, no less. But the symbolism of the coronation itself is fascinating, isn't it? He doesn't get crowned by the Pope.
No. In the famous painting by David, you see the Pope sitting behind him, almost sidelined. Napoleon takes the crown and places it on his own head, and then crowns Josephine Empress.
The message being?
My power comes from myself, from my achievements, from the support of the army, from the will of the French people expressed through plebiscites he held. Not from God, not from ancient hereditary right. It's a new kind of monarchy, born out of the revolution, even as it seems to betray its republican ideals.
So after all that fire and blood, 15 years of turmoil, what truly lasted, what endured from this necessary storm, as you called it, the source that confirmed the old world really was gone for good.
Yes. The biggest, most irreversible change was the complete abolition of feudalism. The complex web of seigneurial dues, obligations, privileges, gone forever. Peasants were now free citizens owning land or working for wages in a market economy. That transformed French society and eventually much of Europe as Napoleon's armies marched across it.
A massive social and economic shift. And politically.
The language changed forever. Even under an emperor, the discourse was now about citizens, not subjects. The idea of the nation as the source of sovereignty, even if temporarily delegated to an emperor, was established. The expectation of a written constitution, of laws applied equally, at least in theory, for men, That became the new baseline.
The idea of rights, even if imperfectly applied.
Exactly. And the model, the very possibility of revolution, had a huge international impact, didn't it?
Absolutely. The sources point directly to the Haitian Revolution. Enslaved people hearing the French ideals of liberty and equality and rising up to claim them for themselves, defeating Napoleon's armies eventually to create the first independent Black Republic.
A direct consequence. And then later, the inspiration for independence movements across Latin America against Spanish colonial rule. The French Revolution proved that entrenched monarchies could be overthrown, that new political orders could be imagined and fought for.
So, when we synthesize this whole contradictory saga, what's the takeaway?
It's that profound change is often violent, chaotic, and unpredictable. The revolution wasn't a neat progression towards democracy. It was this terrifying, glorious, destructive, creative surge. It devoured the old regime, then turned on itself in that impossible quest for purity, and finally found stability only under the rule of a military genius who both consolidated and curtailed its legacy.
It promised justice, delivered terror, yet somehow paved the way for modern citizenship.
Exactly. Without that storm, however bloody, the transition away from feudalism and divine right monarchy towards concepts of national sovereignty and citizens' rights might have taken generations longer, or followed a completely different, perhaps equally painful path. Hashtag tag 7. Outro.
We've traced this incredible arc today, from, starving peasants boiling weeds through the idealism of '89, the terror of '93, and landing with the self-crowned emperor in 1804. It's a lot.
It is. The sheer density of events, the complexity of the motives, the scale of the transformation, it's staggering. And as we said at the start, the revolution ultimately left us with more questions than answers. Profound, difficult questions that we're still wrestling with today.
Yeah, the sources really throw down a challenge, don't they? Like, how far should liberty go? Can you have too much? Does the pursuit of absolute freedom or absolute virtue, as Robespierre saw it, inevitably lead to its opposite?
The terror certainly suggests a terrifying possibility there, that the belief in human perfectibility, when combined with absolute power, might be one of the most dangerous political ideas ever conceived.
And what about equality? Can it actually survive human nature, survive ambition? We saw this dream of a classless republic.
Morph into a meritocracy, maybe, but one easily captured by a powerful individual like Napoleon, using the very centralized state structures the revolutionaries themselves had created. Is there an inherent tension between equality and individual ambition?
And maybe the hardest one, fraternity. That ideal of human brotherhood. Is it truly possible? Especially in a society marked by deep divisions, by fear, by the memory, the stain of recent violence. Can we really overcome our differences and suspicions?
The revolution tried, perhaps more radically than any movement before or since, to build a society on those three pillars: liberty, equality, fraternity. And its struggles, its triumphs, its horrific failures, they don't give us easy answers.
No, they don't. What the French Revolution did, maybe, was ask those questions more loudly, more violently, and sometimes more beautifully than they ever been asked before. It forced humanity to confront the promises and the perils of radical political change.
It wasn't just an event in French history, it was a fundamental rupture, the definitive beginning, perhaps, of modern political consciousness, for better and for worse.
A truly stunning deep dive. Thank you for navigating that with us, and thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.